All right, we are live and second stream of the day. Let's go. What are we looking into? I was just thinking about it. This morning I saw a video about Quebec, and that was interesting. This video was all about how Quebec, which is a province in Canada, where their language is French, and how Canada is basically subsidizing Quebec. And there's a lot of like things happening in Quebec. So basically, just because of Quebec, earlier French was a second language, but just because of Quebec and its political power, French was made into a official language. So both English and French became Canada's official language. Now, what is the problem? What is the problem between? There might be some business problems, right? Like just with simple products, that now you have a product, and with every product that you purchase, the company has to not only put the English text but also the French text. And that comes with like very specific problems. Like, okay, now you're using more ink, and now you have more boards on the streets in both the languages, stuff like that. So that is one aspect of it. But just from a political perspective, I think that was very interesting, where if French is not the second language, but French is also the official language, this means that if you are in the government, especially if you're the Prime Minister of Canada, you have to know both the languages, English and French, which basically means that everybody who do not know French, and French is kind of a hard language to learn. So it's not just like, oh, I want to be the Prime Minister of Canada. Actually, you can learn if you have a lot of motivation. You can learn, but that's a barrier now. That's a barrier to entry now, because obviously the people who grew up speaking French, who are from there, now they have the power. They have more power because now they don't only know English, they also know French. So there's kind of like concentration of power happening. But in general, I've also found this. Like, I was talking to some French people, and one of the people I was talking to, she was like, even I have problems. Like, what is this masculine and feminine thing? Like, is it lashes, lashes? They both sound same to me. So it was very interesting to just see perspective of native French people, how they grew up speaking this language. But even among them, they do make grammatical mistakes. They are not grammatically always correct, and that was very interesting for me to learn. And in general, French seems like a not so very efficient language. It's more poetic. It's more. It sounds good. It is more poetic and stuff like that. But it is not efficient. It is not effective. Which means that if you want to do business, it's much easier to do business in English than to do in French. With French, the simplest thing you can see is that if you go to Montreal, and if you see bunch of signs on the road or something, you will see the English sign takes less space and the French sign takes more space. That's it. Like, the language has a bunch of stuff going on. You have some words are just longer. You have a lot of words that you have some words are longer. You have a lot of letters that are just not pronounced. They're just there like for aesthetics. Like X, there are so many X's and U's and O's and E's. They are not really pronounced, but they're just there for aesthetic. And then there are the articles, lu, la, lay. What else? There are a lot of things happening. A lot of things happening. So in general, if you want to express an idea, that idea will, if you just look at the number of letters used to express the same idea, French is significantly higher than English. So French is just not an efficient language. So that was very interesting to learn from natives, and how even they find some of the grammar very interesting. But anyways, also I think it was also it was also very interesting. Like, recently I saw, like, you can see how when language is difficult, how do you actually teach a baby? You start with words, and then the baby starts just blurting. What's the word? Blurting out. I think blurting is the word. Blurts. Yeah, I think blurt is the word. The baby just starts blurting out words. There's a nice crow sitting on a balcony. But anyways, their babies start blurting out words, and then slowly, every time they make a grammatical mistake, the parents keep correcting them. That, oh, it's not lushes, it's lashes. And it was very interesting. Like, I was just walking by, and then I think there was a little baby who just said something like, "Oh, it's more bigger," and the dad corrected him, "It's bigger." so so that was very funny, like how your parent, like when you are a kid, you and how you learn the language. You first know words that, okay, water, food, whatever, chair, table. Then you start forming sentence, and you are naturally going to make mistakes, and then with every mistake your parents are going to correct you. No, 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 this, that's not how it's said, it's said like this. And then slowly you are, as you learn, as you have contact with reality, you are learning the language. That is very interesting. Like, even for me, I think most of my language, a lot of my accent, not accent, but sentence structure and words just came from contact with reality, right? Like when you are back home, we learn English, but English was mostly very professional, and most of the time you only speak with teachers. You don't speak English with your friends. But after coming over here, listening, a lot of listening, specifically phrases, just listening to a lot of phrases that people use, like by the way, anyways, stuff like that, and when to use those phrases. And then as you get into as you get into just listening to a bunch of content and podcasts, you then pick up phrases that you like from other people. And then slowly your accent is improving, your phrasings are improving, the way you communicate your ideas improve. And that's how you are kind of assimilating in the language. So you need a lot of contact with reality and constant tweaks and constant molds in your sentence structuring. And that's how language comes. And yeah, the best way to do is just be around a lot of people. Assimilation. In university, it's friends. Then at work, it's a lot of colleagues, and then in business, it's business partners, stuff like that. But anyways, let's. So now we have a lot of context. Which language is the most effective, efficient for, let's say, doing business? For doing business. And this is also the very interesting thing about language is also the fact that now that English has become the language. If most of the innovation is happening in America, and America has kind of positioned them in a way that, hey, we are not like you. Japan, when you think about Japan, you you know how a Japanese person looks like. When you think about India, you know how an Indian person looks like. When you think about China, you know how a Chinese person looks like. When you think about Middle East, you know how Middle Eastern person looks like. But when you think about America, you have no idea. You can have an idea, but basically the idea is that America is just land of immigrants, and there are all variety of people over there, and people look like everything. So you don't have like one. You don't have an American person is not like one like they don't look like just they don't all look same. They are from all around the world, and melting pot, as they like to say. So that is very interesting, because now what is happening is that if all the innovation is happening in America, if that is sucking all the talent, the best talent from the world, because they are paying a lot, because they have not only because they're paying a lot, but because they have attracted all these people from around the world with all these different perspectives. Now what's happening is that when you go to America, your colleagues are just very interesting, because they are coming from around the world with all the perspectives. And but in your country, there's a sort of, what do we call it, uniformity. Everybody is, yeah, your country is big, definitely, but still your country is just your country, your demographic is just your demographic, and there is a certain limit, and you don't have the global perspective of how the world is thinking. So not only they pay more, but also the perspectives and the global perspective, the global worldview, you get both of that. So now that all the innovation is happening in America, all the latest technology is happening in America, where the language is English. Now the language is moving so much faster, because all the top quality research is happening in English. All the new words and phrases that are used for naming these new technologies are in English. So naturally, what is happening is all the other languages, it's just like software, all the other languages are slowly getting outdated because now in French, I don't know how to say quantum mechanics. It is just quantum mechanics. You cannot just say la quantum na mechanica. Like it is just quantum mechanics. So it's just like software. The teams that ship fast will out will be the one that will be used by the world because other softwares have just been outdated and they didn't keep pace with the teams that were shipping the most. So that is the exact same thing that is happening over here now. In French, let's say French has colonized the world. French people has colonized the world. French people, they have a lot of colonies. They have a lot of rich history in art. So there will be a lot of words that are very specific. Uh, there are a lot of words, if you go in history, a lot of words are derived or used exactly like in French. A lot of cultural things come exactly from French. But now when you think about the modern latest advanced technology, French cannot keep up with that. Everything is happening in English. All right, let's look over here. Extensive analysis, 41 seconds. Rankings. English is widely regarded as the most effective and efficient language for conducting international business. So is the global lingua franca, enabling communication across diverse markets, industries, and organizations without the need for intermediaries in most cases. This efficiency stems from its widespread adoption over 1.5 billion speakers worldwide, including non-native, dominance in 70% plus of global business communications, and status as the primary language for negotiations, documentation, operation sectors like technology, finance, aviation, e-commerce. Official language of, I think I've also heard about this, like one of my friends, he's from South Korea, and he mentioned that how earlier for aviation, the pilot, the crew member, the pilot, the ATC, air traffic control, they would use Korean language to communicate. But then they realized, like even in Korean language, there are some subtleties which make the language very inefficient when you compare that to English. So then they made a quick switch to English because in Korean you had to keep you had some, what do we say, insignificant, trivial, you had some trivial subtleties, or useless, let's just say useless. You just have some useless grammar rules and useless rules for if you're speaking to someone with authority, then you had to use a different language. If you're speaking to your friend, then you had to use a different language, different word. That's very similar to Hindi as well, but in English it's just you. So earlier in English we had something like thou and you. So similarly in French you have tu and vous. And so Korean language has the same rule or same rule. So that makes things extra complicated. Just say you. So now everybody's moving to English because they want to concentrate on this one language that is efficient for business and just effective for communication. All right. Official language of major institutions like the UN, WTO, IMF, and EU is used by 61% of websites and 1/3 of the world's population. Learning or using English provides the broadest reach and return on investment, as it's often default in multinational corporations and globalization-driven industries. Resources for mastering business English are abundant and accessible globally, making it efficient to acquire proficiency. While English tops nearly every ranking, other languages can be highly effective for specific regions or sectors, offering efficiency when targeting niche markets. For instance, Mandarin Chinese ranks second due to China's position as the world's second largest economy and its dominance in manufacturing, tech, and supply chains. Right. So whatever country is doing the most, is at the bleeding edge of technology, that is the culture, that is the language that will be adopted the most, because they are just like a software that is shipping fast, and every other software in competition is just getting outdated. More complex to learn and less universally applicable than English. I know a lot of people who, like Mark Zuckerberg recently, not recently, but like 5 years or something, he just in an interview, he just started speaking to people in Chinese or Mandarin. I know a lot of people who work at Apple. I have some friends at Apple, I have some friends at Tesla, and because they have to work in such a tight knit partnership with factories in China, they are, some of them just even live in China most of the time. So they put an effort to learn that language. English, lingua franca for international trade. Okay, Chinese is like good competition, but obviously Chinese is just all China, access to China's massive economy. E-commerce manufacturing essential for China, Asia Pacific deals and supply chains. Wow. Spanish, German, Arabic, French is just 300 million. Wow. Portuguese, Japanese, Hindi 600. Whoa. Why is Hindi down there? Yeah, Hindi should be up here. Hindi is the number 3 language, yeah. Chinese, vital for Latin America, US Hispanic market projected largest by 2050. Easier for English speakers, strong in agricultural, fintech. Interesting. US Hispanic market, vital for Latin America. Okay, that is very interesting because, yes, as we know, like it's something we're talking about recently, like the Uber driver who was from Singapore, he was talking about how Singapore and Malaysia, they are just like interconnected with just one bridge, and there are people who are just like traveling every single day for work. A very similar thing is happening with San Diego and Tijuana, which is on the border of Mexico, US Mexico border. So San Diego is a major city, and a lot of people from Tijuana are driving to San Diego for work pretty much every day, and that's their job, full-time job. So that is kind of crazy. German, Europe's economic engine, automotive engineering key for EU trade and R&D collaborations. Gateway to MENA regions, oil, gas, construction, growing to e-commerce infrastructure opportunities. Arabic, French used in Africa's fast-growing markets, diplomacy, NGOs, official in UNWTO. Accessible for English learners. Accessible for English learners, okay. Official in UNWTO, okay, wow. Portuguese, Hindi unlocks India's digital consumer boom and startups, useful for outsourcing and regional partnerships. Japanese leadership in tech, robotics, autos, builds rapport in B2B with Japanese firms. High ROI despite learning curve. High ROI, okay. If not English, what language? Oh, maybe they're ranking based on how easy it is to learn. So English, Chinese. Oh, so they're taking a bunch of other aspects into consideration. That's why Hindi is down. It's not just because of global speakers. Okay. So German is easier than Arabic, and French is like harder than Spanish, German, Arabic. Okay, I think they're also considering the global speaker pool as well over here. Portuguese, and I'm surprised Portuguese and Spanish are so far apart. But that makes sense. Like Portuguese doesn't really bring anything as compared to Spanish. Essential for Brazil, Latin America's largest economy. Interesting. What were the key moments in history that led English to become the lingua franca for international trade? By the way, also, I just want to look at Art Deco. Let's look at some Art Deco. We need to start using a bunch of art. Okay, we'll update our video's thumbnail to Art Deco. We need more beauty. Oh, this reminds me. I went to this beautiful cafe. Yeah, again, explore, exploit problem. I was in Montreal and I was like, okay, there's a cafe that I have been to. And maybe on my last day, I'll go to the same cafe because I already explored. It's time to exploit. But then I'm like, okay, wait, I'm already here, but still, let me make a quick research on ChatGPT because this is a beautiful place. There should be something way better. And I'm like, okay, give me the best coffee shop in Old Town. And then it gives me Crew Cafe. And I'm like, what is Crew Cafe? And it looks pretty cool. And then I go in there, and this is basically like an old RBC bank building, Royal Bank of Canada building. And that has been converted into a cafe and was beautiful. It was beautiful. Like, yeah, it's basically like this Art Deco. It's like an like palace kind of building, like old a bank building with all that art, and even they have their tellers, the bank teller windows over there. And now it's like a really beautiful blend of like all these gold color plate, not gold plated but gold color plated, all these bank tellers and all the art at the top, and like palace kind of things, and like big pillars. And then in front of that they have the Marzocco, or whatever that is, La Marzocco coffee machine, and like fancy coffee equipments, modern fancy coffee equipments in steel and copper. It was really cool. Yeah, this is what we need. We need more beauty. We need more beauty. Yeah, Chrysler Building seems to be like the, what do we say? The epitome of Art Deco. All right. The rise of English as the lingua franca for international trade is a result of centuries of geopolitical, economic, and technological developments. It began as a regional Germanic dialect but evolved through conquest, colonial expansion, industrial innovation, and global power shifts to become the default language for cross border commerce, negotiations, and financial systems. Not accidental but tied to the dominance of English speaking powers and trade networks from the British Empire's mercantile empire to the United States' post war economic hegemony and the digital era's connectivity. To outline the progression, here's a chronological table of key historical moments drawing from historical analysis. Each entry includes a date or period, a brief explanation of its role in elevating English for trade and supporting sources. 5th century, key moment event, Anglo-Saxon invasions of Britain introducing Old English. Anglo-Saxon, Germanic, it was a Germanic dialect, impact on English as lingua franca. Laid the foundation roots of the language, setting the stage for its later global spread through British influence. Anglo-Saxon invasions of Britain introducing Old English. 1066, Norman conquest, leading to Middle English with French influences. Enrich the vocabulary for diplomacy and commerce, making English more adaptable for international dealings. What is this website? Simon and Simon. The history of world's lingua franca. Wait, it's lingua franca. Have I been pronouncing that wrong? I think I've been saying lingua franca. How technology has changed the way we communicate. The 20th century, from importa to exporta, the story of English language. All right, I think I like how this is a clean table over here. All right, 1600, chartering of the East India Company for trade with Asia. Established English as a language of colonial trade networks in India and beyond, facilitating mercantile expansion. 1607, 1788. English settlements in North America, Jamestown, Australia, and other colonies. Wow, so at the same time when they came to India is the time when they went to America. English settlements in North America, Jamestown, Australia, and other colonies spread English through colonial administration and trade hubs. So the only difference between French and English is that French went for Africa and English went for the new land, America. And this new land they were able to innovate. Spread English through colonial. It's also so important to think about weather. How much of history is just shaped by the weather of that land, because good weather means motivation, good weather means inspiration, good weather means motivation, inspiration. You can focus on yourself. Once you focus on yourself, then you can focus on others. Once you focus on others, you can focus on the entire world. That is crazy. That is crazy. How much weather, how big of a role weather plays. Chartering of the East India Company for trade with Asia. Establish English as the language of colonial trade networks in India and beyond, facilitating mercantile expansion. English settlements in North. Okay, we did that. Colonial administration trade hubs creating English speaking markets in the Americas and Pacific. 18th century industrial revolution in Britain with innovations, manufacturing, and science positioned English as the language of technological and economic advancement, requiring global traders to adopt it for competitiveness. Yeah, so there was a competition between how and why did English supplant French as the world's lingua franca. Oh, wow, okay. Position as the language of technological, and so we need to look into this. Peak expansion of the British Empire, establishing trading posts worldwide, India, Africa, Southeast Asia, made English the administrative, commercial language across vast empires, with London as the world's financial center, supplanting French in global trade. Inventions of the telegraph, transatlantic cable, and telephone revolutionized rapid international communication, embedding English in global business correspondence and trade logistics. Global business correspondence and trade logistics. So has been going on. Revolutionized rapid international communication, embedding English in global business correspondence and trade logistics. World War I and Treaty of Versailles. British Empire at its zenith post-war, reinforcing English in international diplomacy and trade agreements. World War II and Allied victory. U.S. emergence as superpower post-war boosted English in global finance, aid programs, Marshall Plan, and trade institutions like the IMF and World Bank. Post-war, post-Cold War, U.S. economic boom and cultural exports. Cultural exports, yeah, Hollywood is then the big one. Solidified English as the language of multinational corporations, aviation, international business, outpacing rivals like Russian. Right, so Russian could have been a big competitor as well. It depends on who rules the world, who has the most power, who emerges as the most powerful. That language will be the one that people will have to learn. End of the Cold War and dissolution of the USSR removed ideological barriers, allowing English to dominate global trade, diplomacy, and emerging markets in Eastern Europe and Asia. Commercialization of the internet and release of Mosaic web browser made English the primary language of digital trade, e-commerce, and global information exchange, accelerating its use in business worldwide. Yeah, so this is when internet was formed, exploded, and whoever controlled that important technology is going to be the language that will be used worldwide. English's ascent was driven by imperial power, innovation, economic might rather than linguistic superiority. Today, it underpins over 70% of international business communications, with organizations like WTO and UN relying on it for efficiency. Other languages like Mandarin are rising in specific regions. English's historical entrenchment in trade systems ensures its continued dominance. How did English supplant French? How did English language supplant French? Specifically French, yes. Art Nouveau. Champenois. Yeah, keep French for art. Like, I like to say champignon, biscuit, lefèvre utile. We'll do that. We'll do that for art. Art Deco versus Art Nouveau. All right. The transition of English supplanting French as the dominant lingua franca, particularly in diplomacy, trade, and international relation, was a gradual spanning centuries driven by shifts in geopolitical power, economic dominance, and cultural influence. French rose to prominence in the 17th century, replacing Latin as the prestige language of European courts, diplomacy, intellectual exchange due to France's military and cultural ascendancy under figures like Louis XIV, Louis XIV, and during the Enlightenment. It held this status until the mid 20th century when Britain's imperial expansion, the Industrial Revolution, the United States post World War II superpower status propelled English forward. Vast reach of the British Empire, covering a quarter of the world's land by the early 20th century, technological innovations originating in English-speaking nations, and American economic and cultural exports that made English indispensable for global commerce and communication. Eventually overtake French. For instance, the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 was drafted in both languages, breaking the long-standing tradition of French exclusivity in diplomacy. Devastation of Europe and the US's role in reconstruction by the Marshall Plan further entrenched English institutions like the United Nations, IMF, and World Bank. Okay, so there's a reason why French is still the official language in a couple of these institutions. Retains influence in regions like Africa and the EU. English is used in over 70% of international business as a de facto language of aviation, science, and the internet. Norman Quest of England by William the Conqueror introduced French as the language of English aristocracy, and law, but over time English absorbed French influences while evolving independently, setting the stage for its later global rise. Norman Conquest of England by William the Conqueror. Établissement of the Académie Française by Cardinal Richelieu standardized French, boosting its prestige as a diplomatic language. Treaties like the Treaty of Rastatt, solidifying French dominance in Europe for centuries. French Enlightenment and Napoleonic expansions. French became the lingua franca of European courts, philosophy, and colonies, but Britain's growing naval and trade power began eroding this through English-speaking settlements worldwide. French focused more on art, enlightenment, philosophy, and Britain focused more on business and innovation. So whoever focused on business and innovation. Britain's Industrial Revolution and Empire expansion. Innovations in manufacturing and science created English technical vocabulary. Innovation in manufacturing and science created English technical vocabulary. The British Empire's control over vast territories made English essential for global trade, rivaling French's cultural hold. There is innovation versus culture. Congress of Vienna. French was used as a diplomatic lingua franca, but this marked a peak before English ascent as Britain's post-Napoleonic influence grew in reshaping Europe. Treaty of Versailles, signed in both English and French, symbolized the decline of French exclusivity in diplomacy. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson's influence ensured bilingual drafting, reflecting Britain's and America's wartime roles. World War II and Allied victory. U.S. emergence as an economic power post-war shifted global power from a weakened France, Europe to English-speaking nations, with English dominating in new institutions like UN. English became the language of global business, science, and pop culture, fully supplanting French by 50s and 60s. The internet's rise in 90s further accelerated it. Economic and imperial rather than linguistic, Britain and the US wielded the power of money, or France's power of philosophy, as one analysis puts it. This entrenchment continues, with English now spoken by over 1.5 billion people globally, far outpacing French's 300 million. Wow. What are all the reasons why French Is there an effective language for business? Dun, 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 wow. Art Nouveau houses in Brussels here are the most beautiful. Old England. It says Old England. While culturally rich and useful in specific contexts like diplomacy, luxury goods, and francophone regions, faces several limitations that make it less effective for global business compared to languages like English, Mandarin, Spanish. Limited reach, economic constraints, linguistic challenges, and shifting global dynamics. Okay. Limited global. Let's look at the high cost for bilingualism and mandates. In regions like Quebec or France, laws requiring French signage documentation or services double development cost for businesses targeting international markets. This creates competitive disadvantages as products must be duplicated in multiple languages. Quebec's language laws force PMEs to create dual versions, doubling costs and harming global competitiveness. Bilingualism is expensive, leading to business exodus from Montreal to Toronto. Wow. It's bigger than just let them decide what they want to speak. That works in a perfectly free market system, but they will start to demand taxpayer services in their language, and this gets expensive fast. I visited Montreal last year. It was a bustling city, one of the most cosmopolitan. I was told, however, you could tell it was a city that died and was reawakening. Lots of streets have abandoned homes being converted to trendy bars and restaurants. Even the former central bank was now a mall. What happened? Montreal is or was a French colony, so French is the official language, but the locals mandated every business must employ French as language of business. Signs had to be in French, etc. It was an arrogant move and was done because Montreal was a gem with ports and wealth, so the locals felt that English speakers had no choice. Capital, however, is mobile and English owned. Businesses started to leave Montreal, which gave an opening to new cities like Vancouver, Ottawa, and Toronto. Arrogance and business do not mix. If your city has investors, work to keep him. Wow, so interesting. This guy is like posting a picture of Royal Bank of Canada. He's like, hey, even the Royal Bank of Canada just had Royal Bank of Canada. They didn't have French written over there. Bilingualism is expensive. That is very expensive. Wow. Linguistic complexity and learning barriers. French has inconsistencies between spoken and written forms, complex grammar. Whoa, polysemy and silent letters making it harder to learn master than phonetic languages like Spanish or German. Phonetic languages, right? Spanish and French are similar. The only difference is that in Spanish you actually articulate or pronounce these letters. In French you don't. There are silent letters, making it harder to learn master than phonetic languages. This slows onboarding for non-natives and increases miscommunication risk. Low oral written concordance demands separate learning without reforms. It's apparently incoherent and prone to errors. Apparently incoherent. C'est exactement le contraire. C'est justement parce que le français n'a pas subi de réformes structurelles majeures, donc qu'il n'a pas été délibérément codifié par une élite, qu'il est si complexe, polysémique. I just don't know the term polysemy or polysémique. Apparemment incohérent, etc. Il s'oppose en cela à des langues comme le turc ou le grec qui ont été refondus par des élites politiques et administratives dans le cadre d'un programme de modernisation du pays. Il n'y a rien de volontaire dans cette complexité, c'est au contraire la marque de son caractère profondément spontané et organique. Les théories de la domination sont déjà foireuses dans les champs politiques et sociaux, mais appliquées à la linguistique, c'est risible. Wow, what is risible? C'est risible. Okay, let's do a quick search over here on my phone. Risible. Possible. Okay. No, laughable. Okay. Laughable. And polysemy. What is the meaning of polysemy? Capacity for a sign to have multiple related meanings. Okay. That makes sense. La langue française a été forgée par une élite, par une élite qui l'a délibérément rendue très compliquée, réglementée, figée. Figée. I think I knew what figée means. Figée. Frozen. Okay. So this makes sense because they say that French literally has like this one institution that makes sure that kind of makes the rules, and even today, that kind of makes the rules. There's an institution that makes sure that decides that, oh yeah, so this new term that just popped up, selfie, so selfie is going to be feminine or masculine. So yeah, that is where it gets weird. You gotta let people adapt. This is open source. Language is supposed to be open source, where people make words, people communicate, and whatever is the most efficient is what sticks. There shouldn't be an authority who is making rules and letting you know that no, you don't use the term selfie, you use the term picture. Nobody does that. Il a raison sur un point. Oh no, too long. Next. Apparemment incohérent and prone to errors, poor mastery by journalist teachers erodes precision. Poor mastery. Alors, le français a été réputé par l'exactitude et la précision de sa langue qui justifiait sa fonction de langue diplomatique. Nos communicants biblateurs ont tué cet aspect. Du coup, comme ça ne se conçoit pas bien, cela s'énonce obscurément. Bien oui, le français que 60% des profs ne peuvent écrire correctement, ils sont incapables de réussir un test minimal d'écriture. Presque 100% des journalistes ne sont plus capables de faire les liaisons grammaticales dans les reportages, ne sachant pas écrire. Impossible à faire, le vocabulaire est très restreint et est un premier ministre qui s'exprime comme un charretier. Wow. They're saying like even professors make mistakes. They cannot write. Their vocabulary is not rich. Carter, okay. Tous les jeunes de nos grandes villes s'expriment facilement dans les deux langues, mais ils préfèrent souvent l'anglais au français. De plus, nos nouveaux chanteurs écrivaient enregistrés en anglais. L'argent est là. Tous les immigrants doivent parler français selon la loi 101, mais ils préfèrent tout mieux l'anglais, qu'ils maîtrisent beaucoup mieux. Le français est devenu un baragouinage dans les régions où l'anglais a de la difficulté à percer, mais soyez assurés que le temps va y remédier. Wow, okay. What is this word? Baragouinage. Gibberish. Oh. Le français est devenu un baragouinage dans les régions où l'anglais a de la difficulté à percer, mais soyez assurés que le temps va y remédier. Wow. So interesting. Très intéressant. Cultural and attitudinal friction. French speakers sometimes insist on using French and English dominant spaces. Support tickets discord, leading to arrogance, perceptions, and higher support burdens. This can alienate global partners and complicate B2B relations. French clients generate 50% of support issues due to demands for French adaptations and payment preferences. France resists English as lingua franca in public spaces. Wow. Slow adaptation to modern business needs. French borrows heavily from English for tech science terms, lacking native evolution for globalization. It's not as digitized or internet dominant. English 61% of websites, reducing efficiency in e-commerce digital trade. It's not modernized like Turkish. Greek relies on English for innovations. Forcing code switching poses barriers for users. French only sites deter non-speakers. Regulatory and economic hurdles in francophone areas. Wow. So French arrogance is real. French arrogance is real. Let's take a picture of this beautiful sunset. Okay, got it. Slow adaptation, we did that. Regulatory and economic hurdles. Doing business in French speaking regions involves high labor costs, strict norms, and bureaucracy, which indirectly tie to language mandates. This deters investment compared to more flexible English markets. France's high cost protection and anti business chants no Mercosur. Compound language issues. French doctrine allows court interference in international transactions. The impact of French doctrine of significant imbalance. What is that? France's high cost protections and anti business chants no. What does that mean? Notre pays n'est pas pro-business. Il est gouverné par une gérontocratie idiote et périmée par des rentiers de la politique. Aucun courage. Démagogie crasse. Non au Mercosur, travail gratuit. Culture des vacances. Haine du privé. Pays de vue pour les vues. Threat to minority status and decline. As a non-global language, French risk erosion from English dominance, especially in fragile contexts like Quebec. This fragility makes it unreliable for long-term business strategies. French is fragile and declining. In 50 years, it may lose majority status, not worth learning in modernity to redundancy. Wow, not worth learning as languages in the modern era. Wow. Very interesting. I live in Quebec, so this is the most unbiased French opinion. Before anybody acts all smug, I admit that French is a beautiful language of arts and culture. It's worthwhile to read Voltaire and Victor Hugo in their native language, but practically French is not worth learning today. I'm in real estate finance and loans for several years. Everybody acts like they don't speak English in Quebec. However, it's amazing how fast they learn to speak English when commercial investors need money. When commercial investors need money. How fast they learn to speak English when commercial investors need money. For us Canadians, we have been forced to learn French since grade 4, and out of hundreds of friends that I grew up with, I can count on one hand how many still know the language today. Fact is, most of Canada does not even care. I have a lot of friends that are Middle Eastern. Some of my Arab friends from Morocco and Algeria have literally told me that North Africa is removing French as an official language and replacing it with the native Berber language in addition to Arabic. Let's look at economics and numbers just in Europe. English, unofficial language of the world. German, unofficial language of Europe, as the German economy is the largest in Europe by far. Spanish, over 500 million speakers worldwide. Portugal may be small. Brazil alone has 200 million speakers. Russian, over 200. I argue French is not even a top 5 language in Europe, let alone non-European languages like Arabic and Mandarin, which have hundreds of millions of speakers. The fact is, French was popular in the 1800s, but it's just a language spoken by poor countries today. If you don't believe me, look at League One, Premier League, La Liga, hell, even Bundesliga and Serie A are all richer than League One. Every league is capitalizing on massive TV deals across the world. League One is still poor because only poor countries speak French. If you want to get a cushy federal government job in Canada, you need to be fluent in French. The only reason this requirement exists is because of Quebec. The Bloc Québécois has enough power to tip the scale in most parliament decisions, so they essentially hold the rest of the country hostage to be catered to. The requirement of federal workers speaking French only exists because of this. In practice, it's redundant and useless. Like OP said, most people who actually learn French during school in Canada, myself included, forget because they not only never use it, but they don't need to use it. And the fact of the matter is that you only use French if you are choosing to actually engross yourself in the French communities, which there are very little to begin with. Also, Northern Ontario and Quebec. Northern Ontario. Wow. I've heard a lot about Northern Ontario having little villages where French is the language. The French communities are on the East Coast and are very few. The presence of French in Canada is vastly overstated. At this point, it's pretty discriminatory because you can be the best person for the job based on knowledge and experience, but still lose the position to someone far less suited simply because they can speak French, which they will probably never use to begin with. The Canadian government already facilitates the language enough without such a requirement. I literally had a family member say to me that she got a high paying job with the government that she was extremely underqualified for simply because she spoke French. She did not last. Wow. Wow. Limited global speaker reach and base. French is spoken by 300 million people, primarily in France, parts of Africa, Canada, Belgium, pales in comparison to English, restricting access to broader markets. Not a default for cross cultural dealings, limiting scalability in diverse global teams or negotiations. Totally useless for business where Spanish often commands higher pay due to larger Hispanic markets. Ranked lower for business utility behind English, Mandarin, Spanish, and German. English has supplanted French as the global business language since the mid 20th century, dominating 70% of communications, contracts, aviation, tech, and e-commerce. French's historical role in diplomacy has declined, making it inefficient for multinational operations without translation. France's efforts to promote French over Latin inadvertently boosted English in commerce and science. Language barriers from non-global languages like French hinder deals and cause financial losses. French excels in Francophone Africa for infrastructure, mining, and luxury sectors, fashion, wine. But these markets are smaller and less dynamic than Asia or Latin America. Global firms often prioritize languages tied to large GDPs like China's. Useful for niche partnerships in Africa, but cultural language barriers limited broader appeal. Some countries prefer French-only deals, isolating opportunities. Quebec's French mandates makes it a economic hole, costing billions annually.